Hi, I'm Charlotte Leisman. Today we're back talking about a book. It's actually a novella. It's Henry James's novella, Turn of the Screw. So this is my very well-worn version. And this is one of my favorite Gothic stories of all time. So it is a very haunting one. It is a story you could read over very quickly and miss much, if not most, of what's going on in this story. So it's very deep and it's very thought-provoking. So let's get into it. The story is essentially about a governess who goes to live in a country house to care for two children, Miles and Flora. And Miles and Flora are orphans. They are living in their uncle's country house. Their uncle is particularly disinterested in caring for them. So he has enlisted the support of a governess to essentially babysit and educate and just generally take care of these children. So that's the long and the short of it. What happens shortly after the governess arrives is she discovers that something is wrong with these children. So they're acting very strangely. Their behavior ranges from curious to malevolent. So the children are clearly not okay. Something is wrong with them. And the more she uncovers about their history, the more she realizes that perhaps these children have been deeply affected psychologically or spiritually or emotionally by the things that happened to them previously, which we'll get into in just a second. So the protagonist is the governess, and the governess is attempting to protect these children, to save them from whatever forces have acted against them in the past and might still be attempting to act against them in the present. The antagonists are actually the children themselves. You could argue that the ghosts play an antagonistic role as well, which we'll get into in a minute. But the children, by and large, have absolutely no interest in being saved. So the governess is in a position of wanting to preserve their innocence, wanting to spare them from an early awareness of things in the world that perhaps aren't healthy for children to know about. And the children are not interested. They are openly resisting everything that she does and trying to keep her in the dark about everything they are doing. So in a sense, the children are actually the antagonists, which makes for a very interesting story. This book has a very Gothic theme. So what is the theme of this book? There have been a number of different things put forward. Definitely the loss of innocence is one of those themes, and I would strongly agree with that. I think the dominant theme in this book is actually the question of whether adults, whether they mean to or not, actually play a destructive force in the lives of children, which makes for a very shocking and very thought-provoking theme. I would say this is definitely a Gothic theme. It is definitely a very spiritual question or a psychological question. It's one of those things we can't test or prove empirically, and yet it is a question we can point to enough examples in the real world in which adults have played destructive roles in the lives of children. So it is one which a lot of us would say, okay, I could see how that could possibly be true. So that is, I believe, what James is attempting to ask through this book. And he utilizes at least 4 Gothic tropes that I'm going to touch on today. The first of these is ghosts, actual spiritual specters. So there were 2 people previously living in the country house with the children. One of them was the prior governess, Miss Jessel, and the other was the prior gardener, Peter Quint. And Miss Jessel and Peter Quint were having a relationship with one another, a romantic relationship. And it becomes abundantly clear as the book progresses that they involved the children in their activities. So the children were well aware of what the adults were doing at a sexual level. So they have definitely played a role in the children's loss of innocence and played something of a destructive role in their lives. So that's a strong trope that contributes to the theme. Secondly, we have several unexplained deaths throughout this book. The first two happened before the book opened. The first is Peter Quint. So Peter Quint purportedly slipped and fell on an icy walk and died. For a young man, that explanation just sounds extremely implausible, but the author leaves it hanging there as if perhaps there was something else nefarious. One of the things I love about Henry James is he doesn't hand everything to you on a plate. So there's a lot that is in here that is implied. There is a lot that you can dig deeper and uncover. And one of those things, of course, is Peter Quint's death. Another of those things is Miss Jessel's death. Turns out they're both dead. So the author never says how she died. It is implied that perhaps she committed suicide. The question is why? Why would she commit suicide? And he never answers that question, which makes the book, in my mind, that much more compelling because I like books that don't hand me everything. So those are two unexplained deaths. Thirdly, and this is a plot spoiler, so beware, at the end of the book, the young boy Miles dies unexpectedly. The author doesn't say how he dies. There is nothing but speculation out there. I have read this book or novella I don't know how many times. My predominant belief is that it's actually the governess who killed him at the end. And I think that partly because it factors into the theme the most closely. So if the governess, for all of her intent to save and protect these children, if she was ultimately the destructive force in Miles's life, that would prove out the thematic purpose just that much more perfectly. So I'm inclined to believe that she was the one who killed him, and he did die in her arms. So you could easily go there, but feel free to read it and come to your own conclusion. Third, the author uses the trope of isolation. So all of the main characters are isolated in one sense or another. The children are both orphans. We're going to deal with that in just a minute. But let's talk about the governess. So the governess is isolated in the sense that every time she tries to go for help to the children's uncle, he is entirely disinterested. He wants nothing to do with what's going on in the house. He doesn't want to know what she's going through or help her uncover what's going on. So essentially, she is left alone in this. She befriends the housekeeper, and the housekeeper helps her to understand something about the history of these children and what went on with the prior governess and with Quint, the gardener. But in a sense, the housekeeper is largely ignorant as to what actually transpired. So the current governess is still left in a state of isolation, not always physically, but definitely emotionally and mentally. She is left to uncover the thematic question on her own. And there is a sense in which, as a reader, you do feel that sense of isolation. And I believe that that parallels very closely the thematic purpose, in that the response that we should have to the children's loss of innocence very much mirrors her isolation and loneliness that she feels in this situation. And last but not least, I actually would call the orphanhood of the children something of a Gothic trope, which is interesting because that's not normally a Gothic trope, but I think the author uses it as one very effectively. And by that, I mean these children, they are orphaned in several different ways. So first of all, they were orphaned by their parents. Not intentionally, of course. Their parents died. Accidentally is implied. And so they're left unprotected and unable to, preserve their innocence longer because their parents aren't around. And theoretically, their parents would have acted as a guardian in their lives. Second of all, they're orphaned in a sense by their guardian, their uncle, because he has no interest in caring for them or helping them, and he's willing to pay for care for them, but he doesn't play any active role in their lives, in a sense that is like an emotional orphaning of the children. So he has exited, stage left from their lives, and left them undefended against Miss Jessel and Peter Quint and all that went on in that house, just by virtue of his absence. And then last but not least, of course, Miss Jessel and Peter Quint. They have acted as orphaning influences in those children's lives, to the extent that they have not treated them as children. They have engaged them in activities that we would say are not appropriate for children, and they have exposed them to things that they shouldn't be exposed to yet at that stage in their lives. In that sense, they have actually caused the loss of innocence of the children. So the orphaning is something of a trope that supports the theme, which is particularly interesting. So yes, I would call this definitely a Gothic book. So that's it for now. I encourage you to read it yourself. It's not terribly long, and put your thoughts down below as to what you think happened, how you think perhaps Miles died, or how the Gothic theme is playing out, and whether you agree with my Gothic theme or whether you see something else when you read it. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to ring that bell so you'll be alerted every time I release a new video. I post videos every Friday, so until next time, stay undead, my friends.